rumors that this thing was more or less out of hand because no one knew the amount of tickets. We're so. We were on the state highway, the cars were stopping, and we realized that this was parking for the concert. I've never seen that many people in my life in one place at one time.
And it's backed up from White Lake right back to
Everything that could possibly go wrong is happening.
There was a sanitation crisis and there was a medical crisis.
The governor was considering sending in the National Guard.
They said it was a danger to the community, it was a danger to public health, it was a danger to any damn thing they could think of.
I just kept thinking,
which direction is the state going to go? By 1969, it really did feel like we were finally winning some kind of cultural war against the establishment.
Young people were rejecting the status quo. One thing that affected everybody was the war in Vietnam.
I knew a lot of people just felt we have to do things differently.
We were looking for answers. We were looking for other people that felt the same way as we did. The outside world thought it was a disaster area. Well, that's not what we thought.
It was the freedom of being able to be who you were, not feeling that somebody was going to judge you.
Woodstock, the ultimate collector's edition. Own it on Blu-ray and DVD. Witness the 4-hour director's cut in high-definition Blu-ray.
Communication about what's happening now.
Over 3 hours of bonus content, including a new interview.
And that starts eating right.
We're going to play music in
Ultimate Collector's Edition. Own it on Blu-ray and DVD. Loaded with collectibles for the ultimate Woodstock fan. And if you purchase from Amazon.com, you'll get additional songs and footage.
So this Woodstock performance, it took 40 years for this to make money. They only broke even and recovered their costs of this Woodstock conference decades after the Woodstock concert was finished. Only in the early 2000s did they finally make a profit on this. And of course, last year was the 50th anniversary of the Woodstock experience. And so was a lot of commemoration of that, and the social movements that associated with that. So today is our short class. And since it is our short class, we have a debate. And so we have to make sure that we have enough time for that debate. And the debate involves Lee Sang-moon against me. To South Koreans in advanced industrialized societies, so-called developed countries, churches, and religious organizations have become more interested in foreign policy. So as a way to introduce into that debate topic, I should note that there was a strong hostile reaction among many people to Woodstock and the Woodstock culture that was promoted at that time. There was a strong right-wing reaction. So social movements can also be right-wing as well as left-wing, and we need to keep that in mind. That Donald Trump is in a lot of ways the culmination of that right-wing reaction against Woodstock and against the 1960s counterculture protests and social movements that emerged at that time, and it's here are the notes that. If I can find them here. And so I open those notes, and so we need to go to them and share. Let's see if I can find them. Okay, so I think you can see them. And okay, so we already covered some of these notes. I should, by the way, mention Stephen Hook is the professor who wrote the textbook. And we talked about the Kent State shootings at Kent State in 1970, a year after the Woodstock conference, when Richard Nixon, President of the United States, decided to, on his own, to launch military offensive into Cambodia from neighboring Vietnam as necessary to suppress the military hostilities in Vietnam. So he launched an attack into Cambodia and without getting congressional authorization, using the powers that he had as president to fight this war. And this led to a hostile reaction among many college campuses, leading to shootings and killings in Kent State University, close to my home in Ohio. My family lives here, so Kent State's about a 40-minute drive from my family here. I go up there to use the library sometimes when I'm home in Ohio. But Stephen Hook, the professor who wrote your textbook, he's a professor at Kent State University. He's a professor in the political science department at Kent State University. So there's a connection between your textbook and the Kent State shootings, and that professor was of your textbook obviously has a very personal connection to social movements and the Kent State situation in particular. And it generated a hostile reaction that among the right-wing forces that saw, for example, that believed that the counterculture social movements of the 1960s were wrong-headed and foolish, that the Cold War was still going on, that the Soviet Union was still a dangerous threat, that the Vietnam disaster was a disaster that happened because of incompetence by democratic political leaders like US President Lyndon Johnson, who replaced John Kennedy after John Kennedy was assassinated. And Richard Nixon came to power in 1968 in a close election, and then did what he believed had to be done in order to withdraw the United States from that disaster that Lyndon Johnson exacerbated, without losing America's influence and prestige in Korea and in the Middle East, where, of course, communist actors like Kim Il-sung were watching when wondering if the Americans give up in Vietnam, perhaps the Americans' will to resist in Korea and South Korea, for example, would be less. And so this view that Richard Nixon had to withdraw the United States from this disaster while preserving America's containment strategy against communism was seen as a success that Richard Nixon carried out, only to be undercut and undermined by those hippies and young protesters and counterculture activists who were undermining the authority system in the United States in the midst of the Cold War, which was still going on. And that in this worldview of these right-wing actors, right-wing social movements and interest groups in the United States, Richard Nixon was able to break up the communist camp by opening up relations with China in order to increase US bargaining leverage with China by establishing diplomatic relations with China, and thereby creating a condition where the United States would be able to increase its diplomatic leverage in dealing with the Soviet Union, right? So some of you were in the European politics class, and we were talking about bargaining leverage and how the outcome of the US presidential election affected bargaining leverage for the British in negotiating with Brussels. But it also plays an important role here insofar as, for example, that with the United States establishing good relations with China under Richard Nixon in the early 1970s with Henry Kissinger, that this increased US bargaining leverage towards Moscow to make Moscow pressure Hanoi, North Vietnam, to cooperate with the United States in allowing the US to withdraw from Vietnam without looking like the Americans were completely defeated and humiliated. By pressuring the Soviet Union through the leverage of China and because Nixon recognized the hostility between Mao Zedong and Leonid Brezhnev, the Soviet Union and China, and used that to America's advantage. And Richard Nixon was able to use that leverage to allow the Americans to undertake a more or less orderly withdrawal from Southeast Asia with enough time to strengthen and fortify American alliances in the Middle East and in Asia, including with South Korea, in order to preserve the containment strategy. That's their worldview. That's the worldview of the supporters of Richard Nixon and the kind of people that would be old enough to remember Richard Nixon who are now supporting Donald Trump. You know, Donald Trump appealed to that silent majority that we talked about earlier in the semester, right? That Richard Nixon identified in his speeches to the American people, right? The American public that supports their president in a time of crisis, not these hippies and protesters and college students making lots of noise. The silent majority, hardworking, traditional, upstanding Americans who are doing their responsibilities and voting and working and maintaining a support for the establishment of the United States. And that led to partly the rise of the evangelical movement, the evangelical Christian movement, evangelical political movement, as a counter-reaction to the left-wing movements that are highlighted in Woodstock and elsewhere. And the United States system really promotes interest group activity, including transnational networks of interest groups, as well as social movements, because of the nature of the US constitutional system, right? With fragmented government structures, it's easier in the American system with a separation of powers system between the Congress and the presidency, that there are a lot more ease of access for institutional ease of access for interest groups to get their political points of view and their political pressure and efforts heard by someone in the American government because of the frequency of elections in the United States. I mean, we have at least 3 elections every year in the United States that I participate in, that I send ballots, absentee ballots, back to my home state in Ohio, my home country, my home county in Ohio. There are always elections. So politicians are always concerned about elections and about getting resources and support for their campaigns to get elected and get reelected, to keep their jobs. And so, and they are always looking for support to make sure that they get reelected. So you have a fragmented governmental structures. So private groups affect foreign policy through many points of access to the executive branch and legislative branches. The Constitution, a U.S. Constitution ensures that individuals and groups have more influence than in more top-down countries with top-down corporatist traditions, like in continental Europe, like in France and elsewhere, and in Britain and in Germany. And there are numerous networks, policy networks among government agencies and their supporters and allies in the private sector and the nonprofit sector within American society, who are, supposed to represent the interests of the American public. And so how do you know what the American public wants? Talk to interest groups. If you're an agency in the US government in foreign policy or domestic policy, you have to reflect the will of the American public. How do you know what the will of the American public is? Well, elections are one way, but talking to interest groups is one way to find out what the people of the United States want, whatever that means, the people of the United States. So government agencies, including in foreign policy, are always talking to interest groups. In the area of foreign policy, they might be environmental climate change activists, or they might be the Jewish lobby lobbying for Israel, or the Armenian lobby lobbying for the Armenians as part of the Armenian diaspora that's supporting Armenia in the conflict with Azerbaijan. Oil companies, private sector, they're all forming interest groups. And according to the First Amendment of the US Constitution, the US government should be talking to those people. That's what democracy is all about, along with elections and campaigns. So social movements are forms of collective action involving citizens who have a determination to change government policy. So that's one of the key factors about social movements, that they are trying to change the status quo policy networks, the establishment that has become institutionalized over years of rules and roles about right and wrong, and the way the policy making and policy should be adopted. Social movements challenge those, including challenging left of center human rights changes to the status quo, as the right-wing social movements, including the neoconservative movement, emerged to challenge Jimmy Carter, who Jimmy Carter as president was in a lot of ways a reflection of the success of these leftist social movements that opposed the Vietnam War. And Jimmy Carter's policies of emphasizing human rights and de-emphasizing containment generated intense hostility that had a lot of its support among conservative evangelical Christians. And those would become a powerful force that would contribute to the victory of Ronald Reagan to defeat Jimmy Carter in 1980. And they would continue to rise in power and authority to become the most important sector of American society supporting Donald Trump. So social movements can be left or right or left. They don't have to be just leftist. They can focus on human rights, globalization, the environment, as well as promoting so-called Christian values as they understand them in the American context. Social movements are broad-based collective actions aiming to change policy or societal problems. So we already talked about right-wing movements, for example, the anti-abortion movement that's focused not only in the United States, but also trying to pressure the US government not to support abortion access as a form of family planning, humanitarian aid that the US government is promoting in countries like Africa that have tremendous population and weak economies to reduce their population growth. And so that's a continual battle among social movements in the United States over what US government policy should be doing through, for example, humanitarian aid and overseas assistance. So the US government under Donald Trump, first beginning under Ronald Reagan, banned US humanitarian aid policies to support abortion services as a form of family planning in Africa and elsewhere. And then when Bill Clinton came into office in 1982, he reversed that policy, and then to allow US humanitarian aid service policies abroad to include promoting abortion services as a way of family planning by supporting non-governmental organizations that the US government contracts out to NGOs who are actively involved abroad to carry out US government policies supporting humanitarian aid and development by contracting out to many different kinds of non-governmental organizations that are active in foreign affairs, including churches, conservative and left-wing churches as well, who are actively involved in international aid and development programs. And then when George W. Bush became president, he forbid that policy of supporting non-governmental organizations, American non-governmental organizations that were supporting abortion services as a form of family planning. And then Barack Obama came in, he reinstated it, and Donald Trump again changed it. And then Joe Biden will come in, he'll allow it to happen again. Anti-Vietnam War protests. So again, anti-war protests happened frequently on college campuses during the Vietnam War, resulting in deaths in Kent State. And so we already talked about that. Anti-war activism has become weaker in the US. It's still strong, but when the United States abolished the draft that required boys to serve in the military, that weakened strongly anti-war activism in the United States, because again, people who join the military might join because they desperately need a job, but in a sense, they're not being forced to join the military. through like Korean boys have to join the Korean military. American boys do not have to join the military. So that has served to undercut anti-war protests that still happen in the U.S. when the U.S. goes to war in Iraq, or maybe will, you know, if they go to war with Iran, there'll be anti-war protests, but they're not the way as strong as they were when there used to be a military draft in the U.S. until 1973. This is you know, there's so much to cover here in the time we have remaining in the semester. We keep talking about Donald Trump and what he represents, and but before we do that, I wanted to continue to talk about. We just have a few minutes left, so what do I want to highlight here? Types of foreign policy non-governmental organizations, NGOs. There are different forms. We already talked about humanitarian aid NGOs. There are activist NGOs trying to promote the environment, many different types. They emerge and disintegrate over time. There are United Nations organizations. The United Nations Economic and Social Council also, like the US government, also formally cooperates with non-governmental organizations, international non-governmental organizations that are involved in humanitarian aid, human rights, relief, environmental protection, and they're recognized by the ECOSOC, the UN Economic and Social Council. ECOSOC formally recognizes thousands of such groups today. When the United Nations was formed, there were only 40 such groups, 40 such NGOs that ECOSOC recognized. Now there are thousands. So NGOs are important. And they are active in the US as well. Of course, they covering many, many different issues. Some are very large and have large staffs and budgets. And they are very closely integrated with the United States government because they're used to working with the US government. They know how to contract and write grant proposals to get money from the US government to support protecting environmental objectives abroad. Like, for example, the Worldwide Fund for Nature has more than 5 million donors, and in 2015 had more than 6,000 staff. So that's an environmental NGO that's well established and that works closely with the U.S. government as a contractor, receiving contracts to implement policies that the U.S. government has adopted. Particularistic groups are, their membership is limited. Who form these groups to advocate their own aims, the missions of the NGOs? They would be, you know, lobby groups like the Jewish lobby, the Armenian lobby, the Greek lobby. Cosmopolitan groups, these are groups that are more focused on universal characteristics like human rights or environmental protection. So just to jump ahead, they have, of course, many organizations have different levels of resources, to very small to quite large and established organizations. Religious and ethnic groups, they play a vital role in the US foreign policymaking process. I mean, Koreans know this in particular, right? American Christian missionaries in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century played a very important role in Korea. That's an example of religious non-governmental organization playing an important role in the development of what is today modern South Korea, right? These organizations advance a faith-based community's interests and reflect the self-identity of millions of Americans. In fact, faith-based political conservatives in the 1990s created in the last 25 years of the 20th century the largest and best organized grassroots social movements. Grassroots means popular. They provided large campaign fund contributions annually while providing the recipients of these funds with policy guidelines that they expected them to follow in return for receiving these campaign contributions. So, as I mentioned, if a conservative religious group is going to give campaign funds and support to a politician, they will expect that politician, if they're in foreign policy, for example, not to support US government advocacy of abortion access as a form of family planning to address overpopulation issues in Asia or Africa, for example. The petitions of ethnic groups to the US government for political and economic support are an important aspect of US political group activity because the US is a land of immigrants, right? So a lot of these immigrants can maintain connections and emotional connections and communication with their home countries, whether it be Armenia or Greece or what they perceive as their home countries like Israel. I mean, And so, like I said, for American Jews, many American Jews view Israel as a life and death issue for them, even though modern Israel came only into existence in 1948. The U.S. evangelical Christian movements are important. The American Israeli Public Affairs Committee has more than 100,000 registered members residing in all 50 states. And this is one of the most effective lobby organizations in the United States. They hire someone who works full-time in each congressman's district, all 435 congressmen, as well as each Senate, all the senators of the United States. Someone is assigned from AIPAC and paid to work full-time as a lobbyist to pressure and communicate with that congressman or senator regarding what this organization advocates in regard to American policy towards Israel. And this is one of the reasons why American policy tends to favor Israel, is because, Arab Americans and Muslim Americans are not nearly as well organized and effective in terms of organizing their political resources as Jewish Americans. That's the American response. We're a democracy. If you don't like it, Arab Americans, Muslim Americans, get organized. Don't blame Jewish Americans for being good citizens who participate in the democratic political policymaking process. That's what democracy is all about. If you don't like it, too bad. You should get organized. So public interest groups include human rights groups, environmental protection groups, and we're going to have to wrap this up to go to our debate. International development groups, think tanks and private foundations, other kinds of interest groups. Think tanks is a slang term, right? Some of the more famous ones are on the right wing are the American Enterprise Institute and the Heritage Foundation. Left of center include the Brookings Institute. These are in the areas that are interest groups that have think tanks that have big influence in foreign policy as well as domestic policy. They're also called idea brokers. So when Donald Trump's administration ends in January, a lot of those people working for Donald Trump will then get jobs in the American Enterprise Institute and the Heritage Foundation. And if Republicans win the next elections in 2024, they'll pack up their offices in the American Enterprise Institute and go back to the new Republican administration. Council on Foreign Relations is an old interest group that founded a well-known journal called Foreign Policy that deals with foreign policy issues. George Kennan's article appeared in their journal, Foreign Policy, that initiated or at least articulated the containment strategy of the United States during the Cold War. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation has been very active in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. I mean, they've been really active. I mean, they're always in the headlines in terms of trying to coordinate and work with the US and international governments in dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. Okay, their group strategy and activities, they focus on consciousness raising, shaming governments, public opinion campaigns are very important for them. Internet has been incredibly important for making interest groups more influential, right? The internet is emerged, according to this person, this book, the internet and the development of the internet is not a product primarily of the Defense Department. It emerged in development of non-governmental organizations communicating with each other. So this is a very interesting argument that because the prevailing view you often hear repeated is that somehow the US Defense Department created the internet. And he said this is simply wrong, this book. And this is published by Routledge. This is a very prestigious publisher. Okay, so, some of them engaged, of course, in consciousness raising through civil disobedience, right? Protests, disturbances, peaceful disturbances to try to raise global awareness about environmental issues or human rights abuses. And of course, corporate interest groups that lobby for private economic interests, very actively involved and have always been involved. And we already talked about the military-industrial complex as a broad category of interest groups that are very influential. And they're so influential, I don't know if any president can beat them, even Donald Trump. Okay, we need to go to our debate. So our debate topic is, and who's going to keep time for us in the debate? And so Yi Sang-moon, I will make you a co-host, And let's see if I can find you here. Yi Sang Moon. Where's Yi Sang Moon? Are you here, Yi Sang Moon? I don't see you. Oh,
I'm here.
yeah, but where are you on the list of participants? Oh, Yi Sang Moon. Okay.
Yeah.
So, I will make you make a host. So I make you a host so you can share a screen now. No, I don't want to. No, I don't want to change host. I'm going to allow you to share.
I don't need to share the screen.
Well, okay, of course, if you want to. Okay, so who's going to keep time for us? Who would like to keep time? So let's see who's here. Ho-Young Park, can you keep time?
Yes.
Okay, so you know the time. So go, Yi Sang Moon.
Yes. First, I will talk about whether church and religious organizations are more interested in foreign policy in advanced countries. Most of the countries that are counted as advanced countries aim for democracy. Since there are various voices in democratic countries, there are groups representing the interests of certain groups. Um, in this context, churches and religious groups are more interested in foreign policy as an interest group. For example, a relief organization called Samaritan's Purse, an American nonprofit aid organization, contributed to the implementation of the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS in 2003 by holding an international conference on AIDS attended by religious leaders and government officials. In 2008, under the George W. Bush administration, Samaritan's Purse participated in food aid to North Korea, along with other Christian and nonprofit organizations. Perhaps you will able to say uh, there were predictions that religiosity among the people in the developed industrialized society would fade after the Second War. Uh, so what does that mean? After the war, the people in the developed countries would tend to become more interested in their careers and in material interests. I agree with such statements that society has become more secular with higher general levels of education, more mass media access, and broadening awareness of world diversity. But the prediction was wrong, I think. Religion itself has not been disappeared, and only the religious spectrum has been changed. Religious withdrawal, according to Robert Putnam, was not among those who were enthusiastic, but among those with moderate religious participation. Although the size of groups who were completely disconnected from organized religion increased, and groups actively engaged were also relatively stable. In the case of the United States, the growth of evangelical churches with strong internal solidarity and cohesion was remarkable. Mm, The 1990s was a period of great growth in foreign policy activism from American religious or faith-based groups. Their interest was mainly on domestic social issues such as abortion, gay rights, and the death penalty, but gradually expanded their interest to the field of foreign policy. They put pressure on Congress to pass the Sudan Peace Act in 2002 and the North Korean Human Rights Act in 2004. In addition, evangelical Christians have passionate, uh, petitioned developed countries to relieve the debts of poor countries and the United States promised debt relief of 435 millions in 2001.
Finished?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm done.
Okay, so let me make my opening statement. Does anybody have any questions for Isang Moon? If not, let me make my opening statement. Okay, look, ladies and gentlemen, let's look at the debate topic. To South Koreans and advanced industrialized countries, the United States is just one of the advanced industrialized countries, firstly, okay? There are a lot of advanced industrialized countries, including in Europe, Western Europe, Japan, and when you look at the role of churches today compared to, say, churches anytime in the modern period, clearly the influence of churches and religious organizations has declined. I mean, it depends how far back you want to go, but I mean, for example, do you really think that churches have strongly influenced the most important trends in American foreign policy since the United States became committed to long-term involvement in security issues and global affairs during and after World War II? When have churches prevented the United States from launching tremendous bombing campaigns, for example? The United States dropped more bombs in Vietnam during the Vietnam War than were dropped in all of the World War II. Where were the churches there? The United States in the Korean War, according to a estimate by the one American military leader, 20% of the North Korean population may have died from American bombing during the Korean War. Where were the churches there? Where have churches ever made a significant contribution or influence on American foreign policy? They had more influence 100 years ago, 150 years ago. I already mentioned, for example, how the Americans were not really interested too much in what was going on in Korea. So when they did want to know what the Japanese were doing, for example, in Korea, they talked to missionaries because the American missionaries were there. But the Americans, as a collectively, as an organization, as a government, were not that interested in what was going on in Korea at the time until the Cold War came. So of course, it's easy for American politicians in order to, again, to get support from their church members, to get them to vote for them, to get them to advocate for them in political campaigns, to give these churches a few crumbs, you know, to throw a few dollars their way and say, yeah, we're promoting humanitarian family planning policies that forbid the promotion of abortion access as a woman's right and family planning in Asia and Africa. I mean, so what? I mean, I know that has a lot of impact on the people that are the recipients of those aid policies, but how does that relate to America's war on terrorism? How does that relate to containment of the Soviet Union and the evil empire? How does that relate to containment and the emergence of containment towards China today? The Americans use for humanitarian human rights language to provide a nice facade or covering for American foreign policy, right? We talk about nationalistic universalism and how, according to Hans Morgenthau's theory, classical theory of international relations, classical realist theory of international relations, the leaders of states will cloak the output of their foreign policy process in broadly appealing religious or ideological symbols. And if you have some churches and some church figures there to endorse your foreign policy and applaud your foreign policy and play a role, yeah, your government looks better as a propaganda tool. But it doesn't prevent the government from doing whatever it thinks it needs to do, including policies that cause suffering and death to millions of people. So, I mean, I think you could say churches and religious organizations in the United States case had more influence over American foreign policy many generations ago than they do today. It's more a matter of appealing to American public opinion, in which American nationalism has a strong element of religiosity in it because of the founding of the United States by religious Protestant dissidents, evangelical Calvinist Protestant dissidents fleeing early modern state churches in Britain and continental Europe to come to the United States and their articulation of conservatism in a hostile reaction against progressive, globalist-oriented, cosmopolitan human rights organizations, as highlighted in the Hook textbook notes, has been to articulate their demands and expectations in terms of religious symbols. And but government politicians allow them to do that. Government leaders encourage that or use that, like Seymour Martin Lipset highlighted, right? That Americans are led in foreign policy, and you. Sorry.
1 minute left.
Yeah, so public opinion polls, according to Seymour Martin Lipset, regarding American foreign policy reflect the skill of American political leaders as politicians. And so they try to get churches and groups who can universalize their foreign policy to primarily to get votes in upcoming elections, right? Among Americans. But I don't see, any time where any kind of religious organization has ever gotten in the way of the U.S. government deciding to do what it decides it wants to do in dealing with a national security threat to the United States, including using deadly force. Okay, so I'll stop there, and Pro will make his rebuttal.
The professor said religious groups or churches did not play a critical role, and nationalism played a larger role. First of all, I would like to say that churches and religious organizations are more interested in than playing a critical role in the foreign policy making process. As mentioned earlier, even after industrialization, passionate supporters of religion remain. What does religion mean to them? According to Fox and Sandler, religion is a source of worldview and values and of identity and legitimacy. However, we observe that this religious participation is sometimes expressed in extreme political inclinations. This is the case with Donald Trump's main supporters, evangelical Christian and the far-right Protestant forces in Korea. John Rhee says the nationalism that emerged after the Cold War was a form of political religion inspired by religion. They advocate strong restrictions on potential enemies through nationalism based on exclusive faith and prefer sanctions based on military strength and alliances rather than good diplomacy. The advent of soft power diplomacy has enhanced cultural influence, and in some cases, religious authorities have even sat at negotiating tables. Notable will be the U.S. State Department's strategy to involve religious leaders and religious communities in the areas of humanitarian aid, development of democratic norms, conflict prevention, and security. According to John Rhee, the influence of religious groups contributes to the creation of a durable alignment secularism with the capacity of the states. In other words, religion builds a state and society as an expression of freedom and a form of social capital. Thus, we can see that passionate religion provides normative guidance to secular states as well, and foreign policy is no exception.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, what is the evidence for this? First off, it's a fact that the attendance rate of people in churches in developed societies is going down, 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 down. What is it? 10% of the population in Britain goes to church regularly. What was it like 100 years ago? Much higher than 10%. So are you really going to argue that church is becoming more interested in foreign policy and having an influence over British foreign policy or German foreign policy or French foreign policy? Even the United States, 30 years ago, the word was that 1/3 of Americans still went to church regularly every week. That's now down. Last I heard, it was much more down. It's decreasing, just like the rest of the world. Yeah, I know churches. There are people that are interested in Christian values and religion and shaping their political views. But in the United States, it's mostly about abortion. Let's get to the point. The United States, Trump's evangelical supporters are supporting him not because of his policies towards the international relations. It's primarily because of his opposition to abortion, that he will appoint judges that will make abortion, that will permit making abortion illegal. That's the main issue. The about support for Israel, that's an added factor that is not the driving source of the evangelical right-wing movement in the United States. It's about abortion access and appointing judges to U.S. courts who will permit different American states like Texas or Mississippi, conservative states, to forbid abortion within their state jurisdictions among the 50 states in the United States. Right? Roe versus Wade in 1973 was a Supreme Court decision that said access to abortion must be legal everywhere in the United States. And they have been working ever since then in that ruling, which was a result of the feminist movement, largely a result of the feminist movement in the United States that emerged in the 1960s and 70s to allow women to have control over their bodies, that generated this reaction. It's not the only, but it's the primary driving source of the Christian evangelical movement in the United States. Not supporting Israel. That was added later as the movement developed, yeah, so I mean, it's hard to argue that the churches are becoming more and more interested in foreign policy when at the same time attendance at churches is declining everywhere in the developed world, even South Korea, right? I mean, it's declining as much in South Korea as it is elsewhere, but there's a secularization process going on in the U.S. as well. Keep in mind, in the pre-modern world, the church was everywhere. The Catholic Church was foreign policy. The Catholic Church was the main actor in international relations in terms of mediating and negotiating between states. The Catholic Church was a transnational international organization to which all Europeans belong. Are we really going to argue that somehow churches are a more influential, important actor in foreign affairs in 2020 than they were, say, in 1920? Okay, so Pro has the last word.
Religion belongs to social movements or interest groups and can be concerned with foreign policy and exert influence on it. Such intervention may be limited or promoted by institutional structure or materials, but in developed countries, religious organizations in some form influence foreign policy. And that's possible because religious organizations are interested in foreign policy or world affair. According to Campbell and Putnam, evangelical Christian groups tend to pursue a godly government. Of course, the evangelical Christian groups cannot be defined as the absolute good, but I think that democratic countries allow higher participation in foreign policy than authoritarian countries or undeveloped countries. And the groups also more interested in foreign policy in developed countries. I think religion has an influence on foreign policy, including the tendency to polarize people. Even if it is a negative effect, churches and religious groups, developed countries are still interested in foreign policy. This is because even after the end of the Cold War, the framework that divides the enemy and the allies still works among the developed countries. This perspective includes induced moral discourse on the political agenda and makes it possible to divide good and evil. According to Elizabeth Schuckman Hurd, state actors distinguish between dangerous and peaceful religion in response to the precarious effect of their decision. When God comes in, communism has to go, or an axis of evil are the statements that emphasize morality and ethics that presuppose that the enemy. Since this worldview persists in the 21st century, religious organizations and churches in developed countries are interested in foreign policy, I think.
Okay, we have time for a question. Anybody want to ask a question to Pro?
I want to ask about to Con.
Okay.
And, yes. This is Kim Young-sar. And I want to ask about the cons that these days, like of 21st century, I think the conduction of the making foreign policy in 21st century had like changed. For example, if you talk about it was a long time ago, it could be like possible to take responsible on religion, but in 21st century, there's a lot of conduction making, for example, like for in people among the people, maybe there it could be a YouTube or just a journal, like a BBC or there's a lot of like journals, but I think the conduction between the countries in religion, it will be just a long time ago, I think.
Well, I mean, you know, you can say that people become more interested in everything as a consequence of the internet and YouTube. I mean, yeah, people have been, just because people are more active on the internet doesn't mean that actually they have an impact on foreign policy. I mean, yeah, I mean, and you raise an important point about social media and indicators of becoming more interested. What does being more interested mean unless it manifests itself relative to somebody else's efforts to generate influence, comparatively, in competition with others? And like I said, I can't imagine any foreign policy question that's been decided by the United States involving war or peace that's been influenced at all by religious considerations about whether or not to bomb or not to bomb. I mean, even Barack Obama, I just heard this morning, when he was president, the US dropped 76 bombs every day in 2016 under Barack Obama in 2016. That's 3 bombs an hour, every day, 365 days a week. Where's the influence of religion there? I mean, it doesn't mean anything just because people talk about something more on the internet or over in a chat room or on comments on YouTube. Okay, so we have to stop there and we should go to our polls now. And so.
Sorry, we have to do attendance too.
Oh, shit. Okay, thank you. Forgot. Okay, log out, log in, just a second. Okay, so for attendance, American foreign policy, attendance, add smart attendance, go. 586 is the lucky number, 586. Thank you for reminding me, 586 is the lucky number for attendance. And now the poll, who won? That's not the one I want. Okay, launch this. Who won the week 11 poll? I mean, the week 11 debate. It's anonymous. One more person. One more person. Okay, end poll. Share results. So you think I won? I thought I was going to lose. I thought Pro did a great job. I thought, oh, I'm going to blow this. It's not going to work. And we go to the next one, and it's grade the debate. This is also anonymous. Launch poll. One more. That's it. Okay. Share results. Okay, there you see the results. All right, so I will post the recording on this website. So that's it for today. And I will now close the class, okay? Bye.
Bye.